Two people read the same headline: Officers suspended for helping a migrant family bypass paperwork. One sees misconduct, the other sees compassion. One feels anger, the other relief. Same facts, same report, but two very different judgments. What changed wasn't the information, it was the lens. One based on rules and procedures, the other lens built from belief, emotion, and a readiness to act. In social psychology, this lens has a name: moral attitude. It shapes how we perceive right and wrong, often before we realize we are making a judgment. In today's episode, we'll explore what moral attitudes are, how they are formed, why they matter in ethical decision making, and what happens when belief and behavior don't align. In psychology, an attitude isn't just a casual opinion, it's a structured way of evaluating something with thought, feeling, and a tendency to act. According to Barron and Branscombe, attitudes are lasting general evaluations of people, objects, or issues that guide behavior. And according to Houston and Strobe, they describe attitude as a readiness to evaluate an object with favor or disfavor expressed through beliefs, feelings, and behavioral intentions. When these evaluations concern ethical issues like fairness, corruption, or justice, we call them moral attitudes. And psychologists break them down using the ABC model. A stands for affect, how we feel about a moral issue. B stands for behavioral intention, what are we inclined to do. C stands for cognition, what we believe is right or wrong. For instance, you believe corruption is wrong, that's cognition. You feel anger when you see it, that's affect. And you avoid engaging in yourself, that's behavior. The stronger and more consistent these three components are, the more stable the attitude is. But when they clash, say for example, when belief and action don't align, we have a moral tension. And that's when things start to get interesting. But moral attitudes don't appear out of nowhere. They are learned, shaped, and reinforced. Let's see how we acquire or learn attitude. Moral attitudes don't come out of nowhere. They are shaped by what we feel, what we are taught, and what we observe. As Barron and Branscombe note, attitudes are learned through experience, rewards, punishments, and social exposure. Let's look at how this works in real life. In classical conditioning, we associate moral ideas with emotional experiences. For example, a child speaks a lie and sees their parent respond not with anger but disappointment. That emotion sticks. Over time, lying begins to feel wrong even if there is no punishment. Barron explains attitudes can develop when emotional responses become linked to particular action or values. This is how concepts like honesty or injustice can feel morally intuitive because they have been emotionally conditioned over years. Operant conditioning works through consequences, rewards, and punishments. A student reports cheating and is praised. Another does the same and is sidelined. Over time, we learn not just what's right, but what's safe. McKenna puts it clearly: behavior that is socially rewarded tends to strengthen the underlying attitudes that support it. In institutions, this becomes powerful. People may stop valuing ethical action if they consistently see it ignored or punished. The third and often most powerful is observational learning. We absorb moral attitudes by watching others, especially those in authority. A trainee officer sees their senior bend the rules and face no consequence. A child sees their teacher protect a student from bullying and gain respect. Bandura explains people learn moral attitudes by watching how others behave and noticing what consequences they face. These lessons don't just inform behavior, they shape what we come to believe is normal, acceptable, or admirable. So, whether it's through emotion, consequence, or observation, moral attitudes are formed slowly but powerfully. The next question is, why do we hold on to them? What purpose do moral attitudes serve in thought, identity, and action? So far, we have seen how moral attitudes are formed, but that raises another question. Why do we hold on to them? What function do moral attitudes serve in our minds, our actions, our identity? According to Daniel Katz, attitude exists because they perform psychological functions. The same applies to moral attitudes, which serve at least four key purposes in our ethical reasoning. First up, knowledge function. Moral attitudes help us make sense of the world. They give us a frame, a way to judge what is fair, wrong, harmful, or just. For example, if I strongly believe that public money must be protected, I am more likely to view wastage as an unethical, even when it's legal. As McKenna explains, attitudes help individuals categorize situations, form judgments, and make consistent decisions. Second up is ego defensive function. Moral attitudes can also protect our self-image. When someone justifies corruption by saying everyone does it, they may be defending against guilt, not reason. This is what Katz called as ego defensive function. Attitudes that protect us from internal conflict, anxiety, or moral dissonance. In ethics, this explains how people rationalize morally questionable action to maintain self-esteem. Third up is value expressive function. Some attitudes are held because they reflect who we are. For a civil servant, believing in non-partisanship is not just a rule, it's a statement of identity. This is the value expressive function. As McKenna notes, attitudes allow people to express deeply held values and convictions even when they are not immediately useful. This is why many ethical beliefs are non-negotiable. They are part of how we define ourselves. Fourth up is utilitarian function. Finally, some moral attitudes help us navigate rewards and consequences. For example, a manager who avoids favoritism may do so because they value justice, but also because it helps maintain trust and order in the team. This is the utilitarian function of attitude. Attitudes that guide behavior toward beneficial outcomes. Especially in governance and administration, morality often aligns with long-term functionality. So moral attitudes help us organize ideas, protect identity, express values, and act effectively. But here's the puzzle. If moral attitudes serve so many purposes, why don't they always lead to ethical action? Why do people act against their own beliefs and stay silent when their values are clear? That's why we turn next. We have seen how moral attitudes are formed, we have seen the functions they serve, but here's a real ethical dilemma. If I believe something is wrong, why don't I always act on it? This is what psychologists call the value-action gap. Barron and Branscombe explain that attitudes don't always predict behavior. Even a strong moral belief can fail to convert to action, especially when fear, pressure, ambiguity enter the picture. For instance, a public servant may believe in transparency but stay silent during fund misallocation, fearing backlash. In real-life decisions, context often overrides conviction. In the 1950s, Solomon Asch showed that people often conform to group behavior even when they know it's wrong. This applies just as much in administrative meetings and bureaucracies. If no one objects to an unethical decision, the cost of dissent grows. As Hugh Stone observes, attitudes may be overridden by immediate social environment, especially when group norms are clear. Bandura introduced the idea of moral disengagement, where people convince themselves that moral standards don't apply in a particular case. This is just how the system works. If I didn't do it, someone else will. These are self-protective justifications, not ethical reasoning. Bandura research shows that such disengagement helps people avoid guilt, but leads to systemic moral decay. So even with a clear moral attitude, fear, conformity, or self-justification can block action. And this is what makes ethics hard. It's not a test of what you know, It's a test of what you're willing to do when the costs are high. In the next segment, we will see a real example of this moral test through a story of a public servant who chose to act. In 2023, a young assistant commissioner in Indian Revenue Service was posted to Mumbai's zonal office. On paper, his job was simple: audit indirect tax returns. But during a routine review, he noticed something unusual. A cluster of firms, shell companies, identical invoices, round tipping of funds. It wasn't sloppy paperwork. It was organized tax evasion crossing 100,000 crores. He flagged it, but the response wasn't appreciation, it was silence. A senior officer told him, just wait, these matters go higher than you think. What happened next is where theory becomes real. Cognition. He believed misuse of public money was a serious wrong. Effect. He felt moral discomfort, even disgust. Behavioral intention. He wanted to act, not just escalate quietly. This is the ABC model of attitude playing out under real pressure. He was advised to stall, his leave was delayed, transfer rumors surfaced. This is where most people back down, but he didn't. He filed a formal internal report. He attached documentation. He went on record even though no one stood with him. There was no media coverage, no headline, but his report triggered a departmental inquiry. Internal checks were strengthened, loopholes began to close, not because of a big speech, but because one officer acted on his moral attitude. This case reminds us that moral behavior doesn't come from rules alone. It comes from something deeper, when belief, feeling, and conscience align into moral action, even when the system discourages it. In our final segment, we'll reflect on what this means for public service and how you can too apply these lessons in decision making and real life. In this episode, we learn that moral attitudes are more than opinions. They're structured evaluations made up of beliefs about what is right, feelings about ethical issues, and a tendency to act accordingly. We also saw how they are shaped through emotions, rewards, and role models, and how they serve key functions such as helping us make sense of the world, protect our identity, and express values. In ethics, the real test is not knowing what's right, it's acting on it when it costs something. Moral attitudes can guide us, but only when we choose to align belief, feeling, and action as reflected in the case we discussed. That choice in a file room, in a boardroom, in an exam hall is where ethics becomes real. So long, happy learning.